My name is Teresa Ohmart. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director here at Terwilliger Plaza. Again, thank you for joining. And we do have, just so everyone knows, there's quite a variety of people in different various stages of their information gathering and research. We have people who we've known and been working with for 5+ years, and then we have a few brand new people. So welcome to everyone. Adam Lane is our Chief Financial Officer, and he has been with Terwilliger over a year at this point. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to him, and we'll take it away with this presentation about buying into CCRCs.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to see how, I think this is actually going to work pretty easily. Can folks see my screen? Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we're going to spend something like an hour together. And I hope that at the end of that time, you're going to have a better sense of sort of what some of the questions are related to sort of moving into a CCRC, buying into a CCRC. I want to really provide you some information that will help you on your journey to figure out whether a CCRC is correct for you. And if so, what should you be looking at to decide, how you pick? I'm obviously partial to Terwilliger Plaza, so I'm not going to pretend that this is a completely objective presentation. But I also fully acknowledge that Terwilliger Plaza may not be the right person, the right place for everyone. So we just want to give you good tools to make good decisions, because we're looking to really build a community here of folks that want to be here, and it's a good fit for those folks. So we will share elements about Terwilliger Plaza specifically. And my other goal is to not confuse you with acronyms. Maybe at the end you can let me know how I did with that, because I feel like with most presentations, most industries, we have our own special acronyms, and I'm going to try to be really careful not to use those wherever possible. So we're going to go through organizational types of community continuing care retirement communities. We're going to give you some tools and advice on evaluating the financial health of various communities. We're going to spend a little time on service contract types and also the types of fees that are charged by CCRCs. Timing is a really big one that we talk to members about a lot. When should I move to a CCRC? There are some tax benefits to consider. And then, a very real question that folks have is, what happens if I run out of money? So those are all things that I hope you will feel a lot more comfortable with at the end of our time together today. So one of the main questions that I would ask if I were facing this decision is, what organizational type is the community you're considering joining? Is it a nonprofit or is it a for-profit community? And this matters a lot because nonprofits have a requirement to serve the public good. They have a defined mission, and they must serve that mission or they lose their nonprofit status. Also, nonprofits have pretty significant financial reporting requirements there's more transparency than certainly a privately held for-profit CCRC. If it's publicly traded, a giant publicly traded company, there are reporting requirements, but that's sort of a very different animal, if you will. What I would say is the most important difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit CCRC is who ultimately are the organizations serving. And as I said, nonprofits have a mission, and the mission is to serve the members. So at the end of the day, That's what matters most. Typically, for-profit organizations are organized to make money for the investors. And so if there are surpluses, and there do need to be surpluses sort of over time for the organizations to continue, then those surpluses leave the community and go to investors, okay? So one question that sometimes gets asked is, can Terwilliger Plaza or other nonprofit CCRCs make a profit? And I think a better term here would be run a surplus. So in any one year, does it generate more income than it spends? And the answer is yes. Not only can it, not only should it, but in the long term, it must. Because if you lose money, spend more than you generate, eventually the organization, either for-profit or nonprofit, will cease to exist. So both for-profits and nonprofits need to, in the long term, generate a surplus. But again, it's a really key question as to where do those surpluses go when there are surpluses. And for nonprofits, the surpluses stay in the community to either create cushions for future trouble or challenges, or they get spent in the near term for upgrades and better service delivery. Whereas again, as I said, for-profits, investors invest to get a rate of return, and they expect that return, and they get it in the form of money being taken out of the community. All right. So moving on, and this relates to what I was talking about before in terms of in the long term, Terwilliger Plaza and other nonprofits need to at least break even and hopefully do a little bit better than that. Here are some of the ways to evaluate the health of a CCRC. And this is really important because regardless of the kind of contract you have, you're moving into a community and you want to be able to stay there for a long time. So it really is important to determine the financial health. So one of the key metrics for our industry is occupancy. If a community is close to full, meaning it has 90% plus occupancy, then probably their financial health, not necessarily, but probably they're doing okay. 90% plus is quite strong. And the reason for that is why that is so important to the financial health is that the assets, right? Assets are fixed costs, buildings that you're going to be paying for regardless of whether they're full or not. And if they're full, that means the community is operating more efficiently. Okay. So the good news is that if a community you're looking at has 90% plus occupancy, it's probably healthy. The bad news is there might be wait lists. Okay, so that is a trade-off that you sort of have to measure. So what are some of the things to look at? So many retirement communities fund buildings with bonds, as Terwilliger Plaza does that. And one of the nice things about that is that if they've borrowed money, they get a bond rating, usually. We get one from an organization called Fitch. We are BB plus because we just are getting stabilized after having built a new big building. I expect that rating will go up in the next cycle because we had a very good year last year and we're getting close to full occupancy of Parkview. There are financial covenant requirements dictated by Oregon, and you have to have cash reserves of 3 months of operating expense and 1 year of debt payments. So that's something to look at. Does the organization sort of squeak by on that, or does it pass it with flying colors, right? That's a great thing to ask. Next is cash flow from operations. In most cases, a healthy CCRC will generate enough money from just their maintenance fees, the monthly payments, to cover most expenses plus a little bit more for contingencies. So that's a great thing to look at. Some places where you can get that information is they might have audited financial statements. The bigger ones usually do, and you can ask for copies of those. Also publicly available are the 990 forms, which again, this is the main form of reporting for nonprofit organizations. And you can go to ProPublica or just do a web search, or you can ask the organization for their 990. They tend to lag a little bit. Ours usually come out around August for the prior year. But at least it gives you some really good insight into the health of the organization. So next, I'd like to talk about future obligations. So does the organization have enough reserves to meet the financial needs into the future? And finally, are the assets of the organization, how do those compare to the debts of the organization? What it has versus what it owes. So, and also, does that match up in terms of both short and long-term assets and liabilities? Okay, because you could potentially have assets exceeding liabilities, but if your short-term assets, what you have, were far lesser than your short-term liabilities, you potentially could have a problem. All right, here are some other things that really help you understand the health of an organization. I would ask about the tenure of management. How long has the management team been in place? So you would like to see, that a number of the top leaders have been around for at least, I think, 3 or 4 years. If you had an organization where everybody on the leadership team had been there for a year or so, I would ask some questions about what's going on with that. So in our industry, I think it's important to look at turnover. It's an industry with pretty high levels of turnover because the CCRCs employ a lot of fairly entry-level positions, and those positions tend to turn over quite a bit. But especially looking at sort of not just the executive team, but the management team, how long have those folks been around is, I think, a really good strategy. Also, looking at staffing ratios. So how many staff are in place to serve the members? So just to give you some numbers for Terwilliger Plaza, in 2025, we had about one employee for every 3.3 members. Okay, we had about an average of about 490 members, and we had full-time equivalent staffing of about 149 people. So that's pretty good. That's pretty high. Again, you don't want that to get out of control, but you don't want there to be sort of one staff member for 10 members, right? So we've talked about management tenure, staffing ratios, and turnover. And then the last thing to, I think, look at and ask about is deferred maintenance, right? That can, when you tour a facility, does it look like things are well taken care of? Are the grounds neat and tidy? Some of it you can't really tell from the outside, but it's a good question to ask. Just are there deferred, any concerns about deferred maintenance? All right, let's get into the types of contracts. So we talk about types A, B, and C contracts. So I'm going to talk about the two extremes first, and then we'll talk about the blended one, which is what Terwilliger Plaza is. So type A is what's called an all-inclusive contract. And there are pros and cons for each of these types. But A has a higher entry fee and pays for either all or most of future healthcare costs. So in some ways, you could view A as essentially purchasing a long-term health agreement. Okay, you sort of pay it all up front, and it's sort of viewed as concierge level care, and you're sort of all set if you can afford it. At the other end of the spectrum is a fee for service contract, a C type. And usually that means a much lower entry fee, but it means that future medical costs are significantly more expensive and are usually paid for at sort of market rates. And then what Terwilliger Plaza is, and what many of our nonprofit colleagues in the industry is a hybrid. So it's an entry fee that's somewhere between types A and C. And you are given a discount on future higher levels of care. In our case, it's if you go to assisted living, but there is a discount. So it's sort of a blend between sort of the concierge level care that's all paid for up front and sort of a pay-as-you-go model that is a type C. So here's one thing that I can't stress enough. The contracts that each CRC offers are unique. And so really paying attention to the details and reading the contracts in detail and getting help if you need it from a lawyer or from somebody who's really good at reading contracts is really important because the details do matter here. Here are some elements of the Terwilliger Plaza contract. One is you get access to the Plaza Health Care Clinic, and that's whether you're in assisted living or independent living. It's more geared towards independent living. You get access to our assisted living facilities for 3 uncharged days per year. So this can be really great if you have some surgical procedure done, you're coming back from that and you need just a couple of days of higher level care, and you get that for free as part of your contract. And then, as I said earlier, if you do need to make the move to assisted living, you get that at a discounted rate here at Terwilliger Plaza. But contracts are different, and it's really important to compare the details. All right, now we're going to talk about the main types of fees. So the first one is the buy-in or membership fee. And that's just to get access to the community. It's one time, it's due at entry, and at least at Terwilliger Plaza, and I think at most places, even if you sign what's called a traditional contract, which eventually will be non-refundable, it's at least partially refundable for some period of time. So we'll talk more about that, but there is a time period where you can get some of your money back if you feel like you've made a mistake and this is not the place for you. Then these funds are usually used for future health care costs, for new constructions, for upgrades and improvements of our facilities, and for apartment remodels. Now note that what's not on this list is sort of operational costs. And those come in with the next type of fee, which is your monthly or maintenance fees. So this is the equivalent of what you pay every month once you're here. They generally do go up over time, but we are really trying to make those increases as predictable as possible. So keep them as low as possible and as predictable as possible. So the fees are higher in assisted living. So if you were in independent living and then made a switch to assisted living, the fees would go up because it is much more expensive to care for the folks who are in assisted living. And then what we're going to talk about here is what is and isn't included. It really depends on the contract. Okay, so that's again where looking into the details matters. So the funds are usually used for operating costs, the biggest of which is the wages and benefits for staff. Also, as part of that is supplies, food, and maintenance, utilities and internet, property taxes and insurance, and then if there's interest on bonds that were used to finance the buildings, that's included in that too. All right, so the next question is, can you afford a particular CCRC? And I think that's an important distinction, right? Because there are more and less expensive CCRCs, and it really depends. And so you need to get into the details of costs with each of those entities and what their specifics are. So to do the analysis, you're going to need to figure out both your anticipated net income, and net income is the difference between income and spending analyzed over either a month or a year basis, right? And so income is what money comes in. And usually what I see for folks coming into a CCRC is there's almost always Social Security payments. There's very often a pension, and then there is money that comes from investments. Those are the three main categories, but Teresa and the marketing team and I have seen a delightful range of income sources, including oil wells, farms, lots and lots of different ones. But the big three are investment income, Social Security, and pensions. And then you need to figure out, and this isn't always easy, what you're going to be spending while you're at the CCRC, right? So if you have expenses that relate to your life before you move to a CCRC, that's less relevant. And a really good example is property taxes. So if you're sell the house that you've lived in, and you're not going to have property taxes on that anymore, then that shouldn't be calculated in the equation. Similarly, a lot of people are able to come here without cars because we're so close to downtown. Public transportation is fantastic, and a lot of people are just really glad to not have to drive, right? So if you choose not to have a car here, those expenses go away. If you do have a car, you have to figure out parking and insurance and things like that. But you calculate the difference between the inflows income and the outflows spending, and that gives you net income, which over whatever period either makes your sort of net worth either go up or down. So how do you calculate your net worth? So it's just assets, which is what you have, and that could be, again, it could be financial assets like stocks and bonds. It could be things like real estate. It's just whatever you have, and you subtract from that any debts you have, right? So that could be, for example, if you're paying off a home mortgage or something like that. And so then the net worth is the difference, and that's sort of your financial health. And the higher the better, right? The higher the better, and the more chance there is that you'll qualify for the CCRC that you want to move to. So, as I said, monthly maintenance fees are a big part of expenses at a CCRC. But even under an all-inclusive type A contract, that won't be everything, right? So as we said, selling or not your house will dramatically affect your spending. Some people choose not to sell their houses and they rent them out. Food costs can change really just significantly depending on the CCRC. Many CCRCs have a required food program, right? If you come to their CCRC, you have to buy into a meal plan. And I was a little bit surprised when I came here at how big a selling point it is for some people to say, I love cooking. I don't want anything to do with your meal plan. And so being able to opt out of that is really attractive to some people. And as I said, we talked about whether or not you keep your car makes a difference on the spending side too. So each CCRC will have different criteria, and the details matter here, right? You need to get into it with the marketing team, and then I'll eventually do an analysis, but and this would be true at any CCRC. But there are some rules of thumb, but you need to be careful with those rules of thumb because they don't tell you everything. So a general, and I really stress this, general rule of thumb is that if your net income is 2 times the monthly maintenance fee, and your net worth is 3 times greater than your one-time buy-in, there's a pretty good chance you'll qualify, right? But notice what isn't in this equation. What isn't in this equation is your other spending, right? So let's say you give really generously to charity, and that's a really important part of your value system and what you want to do, right? So that's not factored in here. So that could change things significantly. And the other factor that I think people don't always sort of appreciate is that if you move into a CCRC very early, 62 is the minimum age at Terwilliger, it can really change the equation. So I would just say, if you're interested, again, whether that's here or at another CCRC, talk to them, right? They'll collect some data and they'll be able to give you a much better sense of whether you qualify or not. Rules of thumb are great as a sort of a quick assessment, but if this is a big decision and you want more than a quick assessment, if you're really interested. And if you have a lot of net income, that can make up for not so much net worth. If you have a lot of net worth, that can make up for not so much net income. So, it's really, I think, important to get into the details. Um, the last thing that I want to say on this sort of topic is one of my favorite things about Terwilliger Plaza is the economic diversity here. We have an incredibly wide range of apartments that range from below 100,000 and just go up from there. And so, depending on what you're interested in and what your resources are, there's a pretty good chance that there is an apartment somewhere at Terwilliger Plaza that might be affordable, right? It may not be the one you want, but we've got a really wide range, and I think that makes it a much more robust and interesting community to have that economic diversity. All right. When is the right time to move into a CCRC? It really depends on you. Obviously, there's a minimum age requirement for Terwilliger Plaza. So if you're 58 and want to come here, you got to wait 4 years. Most of the folks I think on this call are probably have cleared the 62-year hurdle, but so it's really a question of, do I move in now or later? So I think here are some of the considerations, right? Is if you move in earlier, there are a lot of amenities here that are, so many, music and classes and outings, and there's just a lot of things to do. Some people have really spoken to the stress reduction. If you're getting to a point where, I've talked to folks who don't like their partner being up on ladders anymore, but the partner is like, no, the gutters have to be cleaned. And so that's just causes stress to, I think, everybody involved, and not having to do that can be a real relief. Getting in early provides some people peace of mind and the future access to healthcare. So I think that can be really good. The last point here, I realized I didn't advance the slide. Sorry, let's look at this one instead. The last point here about building relationships. I had an experience a couple of years ago where my dad, actually, I guess it was about 5, was considering moving into a retirement community. And he really wanted to stay in his house absolutely as long as he could. And that's great. That was a decision that he made. I really wanted something a little different for him, because by the time he did move in, not to Terwilliger, but to a different CCRC, he really wasn't able to form new relationships. And so I don't think that CCRC ever really felt like home to him. And so, if I'm thinking about this decision, I recently turned 62, so now I qualify for Terwilliger. One of the things I'm going to think about is, if I am going to make a move to a new community, I want it to be early enough that I can make new friendships and really make that place my home. Okay. So that's one thing to think about. The other thing that I just want to say, and I'm not trying to scare anybody at all, there is a supply and demand problem in the CCRC industry. The oldest baby boomers just turned 80, maybe just turned 81. I think this is a year-old slide. And so there's going to be a big increase in the demand. So the population growth of the orange bar there is population growth of people that are 80 or more. And you can see, I have to look that in 2026, that's a 3.1% growth. But look at 2027, it's a 7% growth, which compared to the US population is a huge increase, right? So, and enough new capacity is not coming online to meet that increased demand. So things are going to get tighter over the next, 5 or 6 years. So if you're sort of on the fence about, should I move now? Should I move later? One factor is getting into a place is probably going to get harder for the next sort of at least 5-ish years, and not going to get easier after that. It's just going to sort of stay hard because the numbers sort of plateau out. The other factor, though, to consider is if you're selling your home, making sure that you're picking a time when the market is good for selling your home is also, for a lot of people, a really significant factor because most of us, our biggest asset is our house. Okay. All right. We're going to go into some tax benefits of being at CCRCs. This gets a little technical, but I'm going to sort of really go at a high level. Most CCRC members, including those at Terwilliger Plaza, are eligible to deduct a portion of both their move-in and monthly maintenance fees from their taxes as a medical expense. And you might say, why is that? Well, because Terwilliger Plaza is in part with their assisted living facility, basically a medical facility. We're providing medical care for people. And every year I calculate what percentage of Terwilliger Plaza's operations relate to our assisted living operations. Last year it was 24%. This year it's 24. It was 24%, 25, it was 26%. So new members were allowed to deduct 26% of their buy-in, the refundable portion of their buy-in from their taxes. And every year people get to deduct that same percentage. There's some complexities there. I'm also can't give tax advice, but generally can deduct at least 26% of their monthly maintenance fees. And that's a benefit that goes on each year. An important point is that you only can deduct the refundable portion. So if you get a traditional contract, that means none of it's refundable, so you can deduct the 26% on all of that. If you got an 80% refundable contract, you would only be able to take that deduction on the 20% that was not refundable. Okay. There's also a property tax benefit. So Terwilliger pays property taxes, and though that deduction gets allocated to members based on their apartment size. The CCRC calculates the amount attributable to each member. And at least when Terwilliger, we say the CCRC, they mean me. So the amount is communicated to members annually, and just like the sizes of our apartments and the cost of buy-in ranges hugely, that deduction ranges really significantly. And in 2025, the deduction ranged from $768 to $9,413. So a good benefit that you get from being here at a CCRC. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but CCRC membership is not eligible for deferred gain, right? So if you sell a house, and my understanding of the tax law is that if you buy another house, you can defer $500,000 of that gain in buying the new house. That is not an option with CCRCs. So if you did sell your house, you would not be able to tax shelter that gain, if there was any, on your sale of your house in the buy-in membership at the CCRC. So that's a disadvantage. Also, there are things called QCDs, qualified charitable distributions, that can be made from a retirement account, but those cannot be made, those have to be true donations and cannot be a service that you get for that. So you can't use a QCD to either pay for your buy-in or pay for your monthly maintenance fee. And I think I promised that there's going to be no more taxes in this presentation. So, all right. So here is a big question that drives a lot of interest in CCRCs, especially nonprofit CCRCs. What happens if I do run out of money? So it depends on what kind of a contract you have. So I'm not going to go into the details of an A-type contract, but usually you're fine if you can afford the buy-in in an A-type contract and you're sort of set. But For a C-type contract, which is fee for service, basically, once you run out of money, since it's fee for service, you have to leave. Okay. Under many B-type contracts at nonprofits like Terwilliger Plaza, support is available. So there are some caveats. So if you did run out of money, you would probably have to move to, if you weren't already in a fairly affordable apartment, you might have to downsize to a more affordable apartment. And support is not available if it was determined that one of the reasons that you ran out of money was that you either gave away your money or spent it on sort of an extravagant lifestyle, right? And you'd say, well, how can you determine what extravagant is? Part of that has to do with what you assumed you were going to spend when you applied to come here. So if you said in your application, I give away, I'm going to make a number up, $1,000 a month to charity. That's awesome. And if you were to continue to do that, that would not disqualify you, right? Because you disclosed that up front. We factored it into the calculations and it's, expected, right? It would only be if something were really different than what you had said when you applied. The mechanism for this support is something called the Lesta Howell Memorial Trust Fund, which is a nonprofit. And the Lesta Howell Fund has about $5 million in assets. Typically, there are only about 3 to 8 people at a time who are getting this kind of support, which I think is good for new members to hear because it means that we're, out of 500 people who live here, only about 8 of them have encountered this problem. That's a pretty good batting average. And it means that with a relatively low number of people drawing on this very significant resource, I think you have every reason to believe that that resource would still be there in the future. All right, we're going to spend a little bit of time on refundable versus standard contracts. So, as I said earlier in the presentation, even a non-refundable or standard contract is partially refundable for a time. So when you arrive here, you are required to pay the full amount of the membership fee, but 15% becomes non-refundable on move-in, okay? But if any time in the first 6 months, you say, oh my gosh, I've made a terrible mistake, then you can withdraw and get 85% of your money back, okay? And then what happens is the amount of money you're allowed to get back declines sort of at a linear rate over the next 40 months, okay? On this graph, you see sort of the drop at month 7, and that's because 6 months of amortization, 6/40ths is taken in month 7, and then after that, 1/40th is taken every month until you get to month 40. When you hit month 40, you're stuck with us. Well, you're not literally stuck with us. We hope you'll stay forever. But if you did leave after that, there would not be a refund. And then there are different refundable options. So different communities offer different contracts. Typical contracts are traditional 50% refundable, 80% or 90% refundable. Terwilliger offers traditional 50% and 80%, but not on all units. So if you continue, to be interested, we can explore that with you depending on which units you're interested in. All right. Refundable contracts are more expensive, but you get money back at the end of the contract. So how do you decide between the types of contracts? There are, I think, some pretty good online resources, but this is a tricky calculation to which there really is no absolute right answer. But here are the factors that would go into your decision. One is how long do you expect to live, right? So I think that that plays into the calculation significantly, and you could look at actuary tables and assess your health on that. What is the anticipated um, inflation rate? That's sort of a guess because if you could predict that, you would have a fine future as a financial analyst. As far as I know, people aren't very good at doing that. But a big one is what is the rate of return that you could get on the money you save with a standard contract, right? As I said, refundable contracts are more expensive. You pay those up front. And if you do pay in a smaller amount of money, you have money left over that you can invest in something. And you have to make an assumption about, what returns can I expect? And then the final one is around estate planning, right? If you want to leave a chunk of money for your heirs or to a charity, that doing a refundable is a mechanism, for being able to do that. So again, it's a pretty complex calculation. There are experts out there that can help you with it. It's not something that we can tell you, or really anybody, I think, at a CCRSA should be telling you, but I think it's good to factor in these variables as you're doing the analysis. All right. I think I sort of raced through that, hopefully not too fast. That is the prepared materials I have there. At the end of this deck, there are a few resources that are good to look at. I think all of these can help with rules and tools and calculators. Again, now that we have AI and ChatGPT and all of that, I wouldn't trust the answers without verifying them. If you're asking, should I move into a CCRC? But it can guide you to things like calculators that can do analyses on refundable versus non-refundable contracts. All right. So thank you for your attention and your patience while I work my way through those slides. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Adam. Looks like we have one question so far. Do you charge separately for property taxes as do several other CCRCs in Portland?
Sorry, do we what for property taxes?
Do we charge separately for property?
Yeah, no, we do not. Those are just part of they're built into your maintenance fee. And then you get a credit for it on your taxes when tax time comes, but it's included in maintenance fees. It's not separate. Great question, though.
Great. Thank you. One other one. Does Terwilliger Plaza provide a financial advisor to review our specific finances?
We do not provide a financial advisor. I mean, I am the person, so Teresa and the marketing team will be collecting a lot of data from you. And I'm not going to lie, it feels a little intrusive. I mean, you're sharing stuff that you really would not share with anybody else, but we have to get it to basically to do an analysis that you can afford to live here. But what I will say is that I am pretty conservative. And so if I do, I don't work for you, I work for Terwilliger Plaza. But that said, we are sort of in community together, and our incentives are very well aligned to not admit people to the community who cannot afford to be here. And we have very sophisticated actuarial tools that if you can provide us with an accurate picture of your spending, and we've got data on your income from pensions and Social Security and your assets. I think you can feel if we assess that you can afford Terwilliger, you can probably afford Terwilliger. And then also, as I said before, if some crazy event happens and you have, really, really high medical bills, there's less to Howell to support you if your funds run out. But sorry, that was a very long way of saying no. We don't provide a financial advisor, but we do a very sophisticated financial analysis of your qualifications to be here.
The next one would be, are the 3 uncharged days per year in a care setting carried over year to year? And the answer to that's no.
It would be nice if you could bank them, though.
Yeah. In determining type of contract, how does having long-term care insurance play in?
Yeah, it doesn't really play into the type of contract, but it is a big help if it's a good contract. And I say that because unfortunately, I have seen some pretty expensive long-term care contracts that don't provide, that much in benefits. That said, also there are some contracts that are fantastic that people got into very early. They're paying a nominal amount and they have, you know, 250, $500,000 of benefits, maximum benefits. And that is a really important part of the data we collect to see if you qualify, because in the out years when you might need that care, that's a great asset to have and is absolutely factored in. But I don't think it really makes a big difference in terms of type of contract. But it does really help with qualification.
This one's not directly related, but it's a quick answer, so I will answer it. Are the staff at Terwilliger unionized? The answer to that is no. Um,
Can I just say something about that just because I noticed it. I've only been here a year and I've heard this from a lot of people. People comment all the time on how happy the people at Terwilliger, the staff seem to be. And I've heard a lot of people say to me, you must be doing something right. I can't really take very much credit for it other than my direct staff, but it really is true. I mean, one of the reasons I like getting up out of bed in the morning and coming into work is I get to work with people who are like their jobs and are pretty happy here. I trade smiles with pretty much every member that I pass in the hallway. And I will also say it's a little off topic, but that's one of the things I love about being in a single site CCRC, right? Because there are some big conglomerates where the CFO wouldn't be housed with the members, right? Or co-locate, my office wouldn't be. But I make house calls, I get questions and, sometimes if we're having trouble connecting, I'll just go to your apartment and we'll chat about it, or you'll come to my office. And I love that about Terwilliger. So not unionized, but we have a pretty darn happy set of employees here, at least from everything that I see.
Thank you, Adam. Are surplus funds invested or gain interest in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. So because Terwilliger Plaza, or sorry, the Parkview building has been filling up, we have really had some great recent cash balances. We've got two big sets of reserve. We've got a board designated reserve that is sort of the administration can't touch unless we get permission from the board of directors, which is majority, member staffed. And that's in the stock market. It's managed by a company called Quest Investments. The investments are housed at Schwab. But then we also have a number of banking relationships. Our main banking relationship is with Truist, which is the fifth largest bank in the country. We have a money market fund that generates about 3.5% interest on those balances. So yeah, we absolutely manage cash aggressively for returns.
Have you calculated your rates? I'm sorry. Have you calculated how your rates compare with others, given they often offer a certain amount for meals each month?
Teresa, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So yeah, we are actually the only community that does not include meals in some way, shape, or form in the monthly fee. And for the most part, if you compare apples to apples, which would tell you is really hard to do because we don't all have exactly 1,200 square foot homes to compare at each community, but typically our monthly fees are a little bit lower since we don't include food.
But I think it's I would say I think they're pretty our monthly maintenance fees when you adjust for that are pretty comparable. I don't think, we're a bargain basement, but we're also not the elite expensive CCRC in the neighborhood either.
So question about the access to the health clinic. At Terwilliger, you said access to care clinic, access to 3 care days, and access to higher level at a discount. Does access mean the care clinic at no charge? And currently, approximately what is the discount for assisted living, and what does that mean in dollars? I can answer that
Uh,
if you
that
want.
is quite a question. That's great. No, those are great questions. So the care clinic, as I said, is mainly for independent living. I mean, staff can access it. I don't think they generally do much, but I think it's mainly for our independent living folks, and it's a for fee service. The nice thing about it is that for minor things, you like one thing is for flu shots, right? You can get flu shots done, just at the clinic, or if there's a minor cut or something, you can get rather than having to go to the emergency room, you can get that dealt with here. But it is for a fee, and those fees get adjusted annually, and they are posted. They are posted and have to 45 days in advance of going into effect, and they have to be approved by the board of directors. So they're pretty reasonable. The 3 free days, there was some question about the 3 free days. That's in our assisted living area. There we have some short stay rooms, and yeah, that's just free. And the discount is about 15% versus what sort of market rates are. And I can't really tell you what those are in terms of dollars because uh, the amount that it costs to be in assisted living varies hugely on two things. One is room size, because we have everything from a studio to suites. And also, it depends on the level of care you're getting, what we call acuity, which ranges from level 1 to level 5. So it's really not possible to put it in dollars, but it's a 15% discount. Great question, though.
Here's another good one, given our current state of affairs. How does Terwilliger plan for possible fluctuations in the economy like 2008 stock market crash and the current war?
Wow. Well, if I could, again, if I could solve that one, I probably would have a different job. But yeah, so I mean, I think the important thing to know is that there's a number of ways to tackle this. So one is when I put the budget together for the year, I budget for $0 of appreciation of stocks, right? So I'm assuming that we don't have a surplus or a deficit, it's just flat, which is a very conservative assumption historically, right? Doesn't mean that the stock market won't go down, but I'm not counting on that for any of the budget for the year. The only thing I put in is anticipated interest on fixed assets, okay, which we usually will get because they're fixed assets, they're like bonds, right? Or interest on cash balances. So answer one is that we budget conservatively. Number two is we're generally not using our reserves, our board designated reserves, to fund operations. So if we did have a huge stock market crash, it might delay future expansions a little bit, but it shouldn't have any real impact on operations. A related question that I get is, so what would happen to Terwilliger if suddenly Social Security went away? And we'd have a problem, as would every other CCRC and every person receiving Social Security would have a huge problem. I don't think that's a realistic scenario of it just going away. I think, it's much more likely that benefits would be frozen rather than actually reduced. People would say, okay, you're going to delay and when you get them for the first time. But I think there would be such a revolt if the actual benefits you're getting went down that I don't anticipate that happening. And as long as they stayed flat, yes, some people would have a problem. But again, with the Lesta Howell being at $5 million, we also have the Terwilliger Plaza Foundation that has another $10 million. And they also are a part of their main mission is to support the Lesta Foundation. So really, we've got about $15 million in reserves to support members if there are problems. So I'm not worried about the ongoing financial health of Terwilliger Plaza based on stock market fluctuations, whether those are generated by um, political risk or whatever. I think we're in a very, very solid position.
Adam, there's a little confusion, it looks like, on your comments about tax deductibility if you sell your house. As you mentioned, we definitely don't provide tax advice, but I think it's our understanding if you've lived in the house for 2 out of the last 5 years, if you're a couple, you don't have to pay capital gains on the 500,000. If you're single, it's 250. But you definitely will want to talk to your tax advisor about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. My understanding was that if you roll your gain into another house, that you can shelter some of the gain, and just that mechanism is not available to you associated with the CCRC. So yes, if I misspoke, yeah, please don't take my word for don't take my word for taxes. I mean, I'm highly confident, and it is not at all sort of um, pushing any gray areas that people can get a tax deduction for their membership fee and their maintenance fee. But yeah, as it relates to the what you have to pay on the gain of a sale of a house, yeah, don't listen to me. That's not my area of expertise.
Is having a long-term care policy factored into the entry costs?
No, it's just on the qualification side. It's the qualification, the maintenance fee. Sorry, both the membership fee and the maintenance fee depend on the apartment, not on your financial qualifications.
And we have a question that I think I can quickly answer. Is there an option of moving into a different, more expensive apartment at some point after initially moving in? And what does the pricing look like if so? We do have people who move to larger apartments, and we have people who move to smaller apartments, more expensive and less expensive. You can do that. We do have an internal transfer fee that you would pay to make a transfer. If you're moving to a more expensive apartment home, you would just simply pay the difference in the membership fee of the home that you moved into versus the more expensive home. But we do have people who do that for a variety of different reasons. Please confirm tax deduction on move-in fee is 26% of non-refundable fee.
So that's what it was in 2025. I don't know what it will be in 2026. I don't believe there are any big structural changes. So I believe there are actually two methods. There's a weighted average method and then a percentage method that you have to choose. I'm just giving you the number for the percentage method. Again, you'd want to consult a tax professional. And in all likelihood, the number will be different for 2026, but it should be, excuse me, something in that range, that 24, 26 something range that we've experienced in the last couple of years.
And is there a cap on how much I'm assuming that this must be the monthly fee, how much the monthly fee can raise year after year?
There is not, but it is any fee increases have to get approved by the board of directors that are made up of members. And so I think that they're going to have to pay that fee as well. And so I think you've got a pretty good check and balance internally that you don't have really anywhere else because we're really the only member managed nonprofit CCRC out there. So I think you've got a little bit more assurance. And also as a nonprofit, I mean, we're only going to do increases that we have to. Historically, it has been modest, sort of 4-ish% increases. The one exception was during COVID, and that was because staffing costs went up so much.
All right. Does one need a professional assessment of home value for financial analysis?
Nope. Usually what we do is that the two that I see that are most common is we take the real market value that the county assesses and one of the real estate websites like Zillow, and I sort of take an average between those. Occasionally, occasionally there is a situation where somebody says, oh no, my house is worth much more than that because we've done all of these improvements that aren't showing up. And for that, we need um, some sort of proof evidence that like a broker or some kind of an evaluation of value.
Do members provide gratuity to staff? And is
They
there
are
a
not, yep,
stock?
the staff are actually, you sign a membership agreement when you come here that says you may not tip staff members because we just don't want that to be your daily life, right? It's like, we're here to serve you. Nobody gets tips. You're not allowed to. And what's sort of funny is that people sometimes try to do it anyway. And then often those end up on my desk, and then I have to take them back to the member and say, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And here's your money back. There is something called the Employee Appreciation Fund, where once a year there's a campaign to say, hey, if you want to give some money to staff, here's a way you do it. It gets spread out among staff. Um, um, across everybody, but not the executives. The executives don't get it, but everybody else does. And that's completely voluntary. And you can give, people, I've seen donations to the Employee Appreciation Fund of anything from $50 to a couple of $1,000. And it's entirely up to you. And you're not pressured into doing it.
Little off topic, but since we've talked a little bit about the board, how many residents are on the board of directors?
6 out of 11.
Yeah,
And the board and the board chair has to be a member.
is part of income from investments? If part of income is from investments, do you use a particular formula for how much that can be? For example, a percentage of total investment assets.
Yeah, so one of the things that we ask for is a brokerage statement that shows your distribution of assets. So if you're somebody who just, and again, no judgment, just doesn't believe in the stock market and doesn't want to participate in that form of capitalism, and has all your money in a bank, then the model, and I've got a sophisticated model I use, will assume about a 1% or 2% return on that money. Money in stocks, though, has a higher assumed return percentage, 6%, which is consistent with history, a little conservative. And bonds, are 2 to 3%. So yes, getting your asset allocation is important to figuring out your long-term qualification for living here at Terwilliger.
How does Medicare and wraparound insurance play into the care setting?
Yeah, so the main way it happens is that we as on the expense side, um, in almost all cases we're admitting you for independent living, right? We're not really doing direct admits right now to assisted living because we want to make sure there's room for our members. Um, so the way Medicare works is that usually people who have Medicare pay a lot less in insurance costs, right? So when we're looking at your expenses, you would include your expenses for Medicare, okay? And then while you're under, you're in independent living, you just go and get your care as you would normally. It's not, if you're independent living, you don't get care through us. And then when you do move to assisted living, um, um, frankly, I'm not, maybe Teresa, you can speak to it. I'm not sure how the billing works for assisted living and Medicare.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So your Medicare is it does not pay for anything here. That would be doctor's offices, hospital visits. Um, if you happen to go to a skilled nursing facility, if you're qualified and meet skilled criteria, part of your Medicare benefit could potentially pay for that. The only insurance that potentially could pay part of your, whether it be in-home care or assisted living, would be if you had one of those rare long-term care policies. But even
And
with
and Medicaid, I think. I think if you are on Medicaid, that can help too.
correct, but of course that would be if you've spent down all your money and applied for Medicaid. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so it's we don't bill insurance at Terwilliger Plaza. We don't bill Medicare or your supplemental plans. And to my knowledge, that's across the board unless you're in a skilled facility. Does Terwilliger plan expansion in the face of expected increased demand?
Yes.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
do.
we're in the early stages. And we're just filling up our last building. But yeah, we're sort of going full steam ahead. We don't have a specific timeline yet, but we are planning in the relatively near future for a new combined assisted living, independent living building that we're very excited about, but aren't really ready to share the details yet.
So we're actually seeing more and more members applying where one or both maybe is still working, maybe for a few more years. So this question is about that. My husband plans to work for 6 more years. Is there any mechanism to reserve a spot then if we qualify now?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, really, you have to, like, when we ask for financial statements, Adam wants to see pretty current, like within the last, some financial places give only quarterly statements. So right now, if it's March 19th, you would probably only have the December 31st statement, but they have to be, everything we're looking at to evaluate your qualification has to be quite current. Do you offer a bridge loan while our house is being sold? We personally don't, but we do have a company called Second Act Financial that we could recommend to you. And we could also talk one-on-one. That doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but certainly, Joel, we could talk to you one-on-one about different options that we have seen people do. Do you need a medical evaluation to qualify? No, that would only be the type A communities.
Yeah, so we're actually not allowed to ask anything about your health. We get to know your age and everything there is to know about your financial situation, but we don't get to ask about your medical health, which is great because I certainly don't want to be in the business of evaluating that. So,
Let's see.
There's a question about if you need tax returns.
yeah, basically yes. I mean, I'll say an asterisk that would. I mean, usually people have tax returns, so I mean, an important part of your financial picture is how much you're paying in taxes, and so yeah, we request state and federal tax returns. We don't need the whole things. We just need to basically see the portion um, that shows what your actual tax bill was. It's also if you've lost your Social Security statements, we can get your Social Security information out of that. We take your word for your spending, but we do try to verify all of your income.
Can one hire outside caregivers or bring in to assist a member? Yes.
And we actually have a service called Allied at Home that does that, which is, again, when I mentioned that I was helping care for my dad when he moved into a CCRC and there was an organization called Visiting Angels that were great, but it was rough because anytime one of them called out, then all of a sudden I didn't have care for my dad. And that was really hard to sort of scramble. Whereas since we've got people sort of in-house that do it, that's not that problem, right? Because they can flex and say, well, I might only be able to come in for 10 minutes versus half an hour. But for people here, it doesn't involve with the people who love you or are trying to, care for you, have to jump in a car or I don't even know what if you didn't live in the same city. So yeah, our Allied in-home team is great.
Once you choose an apartment and pay a deposit, how long until I need to pay the rest of the entrance fee? That could be anywhere between roughly 40 to roughly 90 days. It depends on how much remodeling your home might need.
But generally speaking, it's on move in and yeah, it's um, Teresa won't and her team won't be showing you any apartments that aren't available. So.
Mhm. What happens if someone needs skilled nursing care elsewhere? Do you help pay for those costs? We don't. Typically, your Medicare plan would pay most all of skilled nursing. And again, nowadays it's first you have to qualify and meet skill criteria. So a lot of insurance companies are not authorizing skilled nursing. So, but if you do have that benefit and you've met the criteria and it's being covered by your insurance, most all of it will be covered. Sometimes there will be a copay.
Yeah, and also we work really hard to keep you on campus, and because we have our in-home care stuff, we can keep you in your apartment longer than many other folks can, and also because we have we don't have skilled nursing, but with our assisted living, we can handle a pretty wide range of care needs.
Let's see. Any other questions, Jojo or Jessica? Is there anything else you would like to add?
I'm wondering, Adam, if you could put a plug in for our finance committee, because I don't know that any other community has the same situation as we do.
Sure. So we have a finance committee that is staffed by a pretty impressive group of folks. It's actually pretty wonderful. The board treasurer is also the chair of the finance committee, and he is a guy named Dick Teutsch, who still works as a financial advisor and is just super sharp and keeps me on my toes for sure. But I really enjoy my partnership with Dick. And we get into it. I mean, this is primarily staffed by members, but we have members on that. People who were corporate controllers at Fortune 500 companies, who were former publicly traded company officer. It's a really high-powered group of folks. And so we get into we do regularly do educational things, but I think the thing that I'm most pleased with is that I really feel like I have a great partnership with Dick in terms of, and the whole committee, in terms of I've got a forum where I can bring sort of sticky issues where we can talk about it. And then, and then we can sort of figure out how to talk about it in a way that doesn't make people's eyes roll back in their heads from boredom when we start talking about actuarial analysis. So one of the tools that we have is we have actuaries who both figure out sort of how to account for the deposits and how to recognize that revenue over the time. It's a very technical field of accounting that is actuarial based. The actuaries also run the software that we use to qualify people. But they also issue an annual report that looks forward to say, are you adequately funded or not? And the first time I read it, I mean, I've been a CFO for decades, but I had never read one of these reports before. And wow, talking about it's a completely different language. So I sort of read it 2 or 3 times and sort of staggered through it the first time. And the second year was a little bit easier, but still pretty tough sledding. But I asked how many of the board members and the finance committee members wanted to sit through the presentation where the actuaries would actually go through this. And it ended up being 12 people. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys are such gluttons for punishment. But I loved it because they were, that's how engaged they are. So anyway, I could go on and on, but it's a great group of people, very, very sharp. And I think that it's a great vote of confidence, I think, in the member management model that says you've got people who live in the community who are really watching out for the financial well-being of their neighbors.
Thank you, Jojo, for asking about that. Yeah, pretty amazing committee. Thank you, Adam, for being here and sharing all your knowledge. And yeah, if you have any other questions, let us know. Adam doesn't go away after this call. We can certainly reach out to him if there's something you need to know that we're not able to answer, or if you just have a little bit more complicated situation. So
and thank you all just for sticking through a long presentation. I know that financial stuff, while it is my world, it's not all of y'all's world. And so some of it can be a little tough going, but thank you for your patience, and it's great to see you all, and I hope to see some of you in our community in the near future.